Hey y'all, welcome to the homework video for the first homework of quarter 2. So, as it says, this is due on Wednesday for A days. It's going to be due on Thursday, which is October 9th for B days. So, those are due Wednesday for A days, Thursday for B days. We are going to talk about how to do these problems. I'm going to do the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. So I'm going to do the odds. Y'all are going to have to do the evens on your own, but hopefully this process will help you remember. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to go find a sticky note super quick because I want to write out the steps of how to solve these equations. So I remember that there were 2 different steps that I needed that I used every single time. So step number one was multiply my coefficients. So step number one is multiply my coefficients. Step number 2 was multiply my variables. And to do that, I need to be careful that I add my exponents. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to leave it off to the side so I don't forget. Step 1 says multiply my coefficients. So a coefficient is the number in front of my variable. So 4 times 2 is going to give me 8. 4 times 2 is 8. Next, I'm going to look for my variables. I can only multiply them together if they have the same base. So I'm looking for an m. I see I have an m to the 4th times, this is an n, so they're not the same. I'm not going to multiply them, but I do have an m to the 2nd over here. So I'm going to do m to the 4th times m to the 2nd. When I'm multiplying my terms, I have to add my exponents. So 4 plus 2 equals 6. So I'm going to have 8m to the 6th. Next, I have this n to the 3rd. I do not see any other n's, so I know that I'm just going to bring it down. So my final answer is 8m to the 6th times n to the 3rd. So 8 times m to the 6th times n to the 3rd. This is my exact answer. All right, let's move on to the next one. I'm going to look for coefficients. The only coefficient I see is a -2. So I can think about there being a 1 over here in front of the x. I can also think about there being a 1 over here in front of this x. 1 times anything is just the same number, so I know my coefficient is going to be -2. Lastly, I'm going to circle all my x's. I'm going to multiply my variables. I'm going to start with the x's. So I have an x to the -2 over here. I have an x to the 2, and I have an x to the -4 over here. So I'm actually going to do this on my phone so that y'all can see how to do it on your phone calculator. I am going to go to my calculator and I'm going to add up my exponents. So I'm doing x to the -2 times x to the 2nd times x to the -4th. So in my phone, I'm going to see -2 plus 2 plus a -4. I'm going to do that right here in my calculator. So I'm going to do a -2, so I can hit that plus minus button, -2 plus 2 plus a -4, and that gives me a -4. So I have so far -2 times x to the -4th. -2 x to the -4th. Lastly, I have these y's. So I have a y to the 4th times y to the 2nd. I add up those exponents in case I wasn't sure. 4 plus 2 gives me 6. So I have -2 x to the -4 y to the 6th. Excellent. Next, let's keep going. Ooh, this is a tricky one. I see a negative sign. What's my invisible number behind a negative? My invisible number behind my negative is a 1. So my coefficient out front is a -1. I also see a 2, and I see another 2. So I have -1 times 2 times 2. So let's do it. -1 times 2 times 2 gives me -4. That's going to be my big number, my coefficient. Next, I see these a's. So I see an a to the 3rd times an a to the 2nd. When I see these, I know I have an A. When I'm multiplying, I add my variables. So 3 plus 2 gives me 5. Lastly, I see my b's. I have a b to the negative 4 times, I see another b over here, b to the third. Remember, I add my exponents, so I'm going to do a negative 4. How convenient. Negative 4 plus 3 gives me a negative 1. So I have negative 4 times a to the fifth times b to the negative 1. That is my final answer. All right, I have 3 more I'm going to do with you before I leave you on your own. Step 1, I multiply my coefficients. I'm going to say negative 4 times 2. I don't see a coefficient over here, so I can think about it as a 1. Or I can just leave it alone because anything times 1 is the same thing. So I have negative 4 times 2, which gives me a negative 8. I have x to the third, I have an x to the second, and I have an x to the 0. So I'm going to multiply those together. I have x to the third times x to the second times x to the 0. Remember, I add my exponents. So I'm going to do 3 plus 2 plus 0. 3 plus 2 plus 0. That gives me 5. So I have negative 8x to the fifth. Lastly, I see this little guy over here. I have a y to the third times y. If I don't see an exponent, I know that my invisible exponent is a 1 because I have only one y. So when I add 3 plus 1 together, it's going to give me y to the fourth. So I have negative 8 times x to the fifth times y to the fourth. Almost there, guys. Step 1, multiply my coefficients. I'm looking at a 3, at a negative 3, and at a negative 4. So 3 times negative 3 gives me negative 9 times a negative 4 gives me 36. So 3 times negative 3 times negative 4, that gave me a positive 36. Next, I'm going to look for my x's. I have an x to the negative 2, I have an x to the negative 4, and I have an x to the 4. So I have an x to the negative 2 times x to the negative 4 times x to the 4. So I have 36x negative 2 plus negative 4 plus 4. Let's do it in the calculator. So I have negative 2 plus negative 4 plus 4. That gives me a negative 2. Lastly, I have this guy, which is y to the second times y to the second. That gives me a y to the fourth because 2 plus 2 is 4. So I have 36, x to the negative 2, y to the fourth. Lastly, this is the last one I'm doing with y'all. I'm looking for my coefficients because step 1 is multiply my coefficients. Looking for my negative 3. I see a negative sign by itself. My invisible number behind my negative sign is a 1. I'm going to do negative 3 times negative 1. That gives me a positive 3. Next, I have this x times x to the third. So x to the first times x to the third. If I'm multiplying, I need to add my exponents. 1 plus 3 is 4. So I have 3x to the fourth. Lastly, I have y to the fourth times y to the fourth. When I'm multiplying, I add my exponents. 4 plus 4 gives me 8. So I have 3 times x to the fourth times y to the eighth. So I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the problems for you. It is up to you to do these 6 on your own. So again, email me with any questions. You can let me know on Instagram. But that is all I have for you today. Have a great rest of your night.